Hi, in this video, the first of the porting Habitat Corporate to JSS, we're going to have a look at how to port the navbar and the different options available. So let's get started. So in the Habitat Corporate, you have this really nice navigation bar that has a logo and has this navigation menu. And I wanted to port that into Sitecore JSS. So let's just actually open first Habitat Corporate as a solution just to show you what's there in code and how we're going to port it to here. So if I go into components here, we're going to see that we have the navbar. That's our component. And since it loads, and what it has is really just a nav class and then div container for the image, and then it loops to create allies for each navigation item. So that's ultimately what we want to do. So the first thing I thought of is how would we really design this? So it can either be the same thing, so it's one component that has the image and the navigation, or it can be two separate ones. And I wanted to try the different options. So the first one here is the most simple one of them all, which is actually what I did was I went here and created a navbar. Let me just go first to its structure. So I created navbar and I defined that it has a logo as an image and it has navigation items as a content list. And then all I had to do in the actual HTML was I added the image normally as a props.fields.logo, and I used the .navigation items, props.fields.navigation items, to map the list and loop through it. Now this is a really easy way and quite simple to do, but the problem with that is that it's not dynamic. So in order to change the content here or what items should be displayed here, you would have to actually go to the data, navbar, and ultimately add any other items. So in case I add a new component or a new page here, say another page, let's say for example I want to add a news listing or something like that, anything else, you would still have to come here in navigation items and add it. So let's show you here. So if I add navigation or news, sorry, here, I'll add the page title, news, and I refresh this, you're going to see it's not added in the one at the top here. It's added in these two, but it's not added in the one at the top here. This is because, as I was saying, this is actually specified by the user himself. So he has to go here and actually choose that they want to add the news here. Now this does have a pro and has a con. The pro is that it gives you the flexibility on what navigation items should be displayed, but the con of course is that in turn the user has to do this manually. So I didn't like that because I felt it just required too much effort from the content editor. So I thought of another thing. Why don't I use the child content resolver, the child item content resolver? And this is the second implementation here. So I created this new navbar listing. And as you can see, what this does is it uses props.fields.items.map to get the values, which would work normally because I've actually defined in my rendering navbar listing, I've defined the layout service to be rendering content resolver the data source item child resolver. So it's getting all the children of what's defined as the parent here. So let me just go here and show you here. The data source is the home, hence it's getting all the children of the home, which is GraphQL and style guide as soon as it loads. So I've chosen home here, so it's going to get all the children of home, which are in turn GraphQL and style guide and use. I just need to refresh. The problem with this solution is you can't have the logo in the same one because the data source is ultimately now the parent. So I need to come up with a way that I can have the logo and the items coming automatically without actually having to create them in two different components as I would have here. So here I could just add an image or a placeholder for the image here, and that's it. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted all of it to be one single component. So I got thinking, why don't I use a custom resolver that would actually resolve this? So what I did was I created a new content type, which you can see here, called Navbar custom listing. So let me go here to Navbar custom listing. And what this has is the logo and the source. And the source is just a selection. So you can select here source, which is ultimately the parent, as you would have in the normal one, but I added it in within a data source so I can have the logo as well. Now, there is no resolver by default in JSS that can read these two together, because you either have a data source resolver, which would in turn have just read this URL, and you would have had to either use GraphQL to get the children or have done a custom, or it's a item list or a child content resolver, and in this scenario it would have only got the children and wouldn't have used this data source. So I wanted to create a custom data source resolver that, or a custom content resolver that would do that. And this is what I did in this scenario. So if you look at nav custom listing, what I did here was I actually added my navbar rendering parameters, and then I added my custom content resolver here. Before I go into the code of this custom content resolver, I also wanted to show you another way that I came up with that works, but it's a bit too cumbersome, so I totally scrapped it off, which is actually by adding the image here in the rendering variant as a parameter, as in the rendering parameters as a field here. Now this seemed to work. There was only one problem, that because the data coming from the rendering parameters is never parsed as an image, so it doesn't return a J object. What happened in this scenario was that when I tried to add it here, it just showed me incorrect data. So in that scenario, what I had to do is actually done some parsing. So let me just show you what I did in that scenario. I had to parse it manually. So I had to slice the params.image based on the quotes, and then replace the hyphens with empty, and then access the URL of that media element, which honestly for me was just really not worth doing and not the right approach at all. So I actually created my own rendering resolver. Let's go to that now. So if we go here, I created something called Navbar item resolver. What this does is I took the exact code of the normal content resolver, the default one, and I just added a couple of things. So the first thing I did here was, once the process item occurs, I created a new JObject items array, and then checked if context item.fields.source does not equal null and the value is not null or empty, get that item. So I want to get the item that the source is pointing to. So again, let's go back here. So I want to get this item, which is home. And then after that, I just invoke a new function called getChildItems that I created with the home ultimately as the parameter. And what this does is it just does a context of the item.access.select items, all the children. And then all I did was I just called the default process items with list rendering and rendering config, where list is my child items, and added it to the JObject items. So JObject now contains all the items that are processed and serialized by default, as well as a new array of items or a new JArray of items that consists of the children of this source. And this worked pretty well. So this is the one I really like because I think it's done in a way that's flexible enough, and at the same time you don't need to go into more complex scenarios like invoking GraphQL for such a simple scenario. You don't have search here, you don't have filters, you don't have facets, and honestly I don't think you should be using or doing a separate GraphQL hit to do something like this. So there you have it. These are 4 different ways to create the navbar. I will go with this one, so I'll actually delete the other 2 so that when we continue our training, we have only one navigation bar. Here we have it. Now, in the next video, we're going to look at the carousel, and we're going to look at 2 ways to create this carousel. Thanks for watching.